Obviously, President Trump, the assassination attempt, he says he was inches from death. I think he was less than a centimetre from death. It could have been a lot worse. 24 hours on, or probably more like 36 hours on from that instance. How do you react now, having seen the reactions from Biden and reactions from Trump to it?
Well, obviously, totally appalled is the first thing to say, but not terribly surprised, because the violence in politics in America, in terms of violent rhetoric, has been getting worse and worse. And one would suggest that this is the logical response. For example, Hillary Clinton has compared electing the Republicans in November to giving way to the Nazis in 1944, and that beating the Republicans would be like beating Hitler's regime. I mean, that kind of extraordinary inflammatory language.
Well, our own now Foreign Secretary used the term Nazi when describing what he thought of, this is David Lammy, of course, what he thought about Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I'm afraid this, I mean, here, but it tends to be that the really inflammatory language tends to come from the left in America and the UK. But let me just say, Donald Trump himself isn't short of what a lot of people would call inflammatory rhetoric as well. Joe Biden has said, if I were at school, I'd beat the hell out of him, being Donald Trump. You know, we use this violent language, and then somehow we're surprised when the voters then do stupid things and deadly things, near deadly things, like trying to shoot Trump.
You see, I think language is important in this. So let me bring it round. The question I'm focusing on today with our viewers and our listeners is kind of, how has politics descended into the gutter of violence? And I'm not just talking about America, and asking what do we think we can do about it. And the reason I'm doing that, Robert, is because in the messages of sympathy went out from Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, he talked about there's no place for political violence in politics, all right? And he's absolutely right about that, of course. But less than 10 days after a general election, where there was a Reform candidate in Cornwall who was punched. Rushanara Ali, the Labour candidate in East London, had death threats, had to have a police protection unit. We all remember what happened to Mike Freer, who's the MP for Barnet, who'll be joining me later, Finchley, sorry, who'll be joining me later in this programme. His office was burnt down. He was wearing a stab vest. I suppose my question to you is, how have we descended into this gutter, and what can and should Keir Starmer try to do about it?
It's been happening for as long as I can remember. I remember the language used to describe Maggie Thatcher was absolutely appalling. This is going way back before social media in the 80s. But I think social media has made it so much easier for ordinary people to get in on the act. But I just want to come back to the politicians themselves, Nick, and I know obviously you have a political record yourself, a very strong political record, that politicians themselves need to temper the language and set the example. And it worries me, Nick, that our Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, herself is on record for calling her opponents Banana Republic scum. Now, I know she apologised, fair enough, but surely when the Deputy Prime Minister is using that kind of language, we cannot complain when ordinary people then take up that mantra. Well, and it's got to start at the top.
I think you make a really good point. And wouldn't it be more honest of Keir Starmer to say, you know, things in our Labour Party, we have said things we should not have said. And from this day on, it won't happen. And you guys in the Conservatives, you guys in Reform, wherever you come from, this has to be the new politics. But he's not saying that yet. And I'm wondering if he ever will, because it has to come from the top, this sort of leadership, I think. I suppose my second question, though, is even language around the Brexit debate, and I was firmly on the Brexit camp and remain on the Brexit camp. You know, I didn't approve when people, other politicians as well as just voters, were calling opponents traitors and things like this. I think calling, you know, we've heard that language in Trump and Biden debates as well. I don't think anyone was being a traitor. A traitor is someone who's selling you out, your country, to some foreign power. Here we're calling them traitors. Even that language was a signal for hate, I felt. Am I being wrong there?
No, you're not wrong at all. And I'm on the Brexit side as well. I've received quite a lot of abuse for the kind of articles I've written about Brexit and lockdown and other areas as well. And some of it is just way over the top. People, to use a footballing metaphor, they go for the man, not the ball, the person, not the ball, we should say nowadays. And that is happening in the media, it's happening on social media, it's happening in politics, it's happening down the pub when you're just having a pint. The kind of language people use is so inflammatory. And I think all of us have to be more careful and make sure that the language we use is proportionate when we speak in the media, when we comment, and when we're just down the pub with our friends.
Yeah, well, I mean, very well said. It's interesting. I don't want to blame social media, but it's given voice to people who don't even have to identify themselves. To the point, funny enough, I'm thinking this week I might actually come off it because, you know, there's great people who follow me and we have very sensible dialogues. But it is quite wearing, actually, the abuse that comes through. And I'm just a commentator, you know. All right, I'm still associated as a Tory and it drives a different vitriol. But, you know, we've got people who've just gone into Parliament, I mean, rightly or wrongly, and there's another day for this, who are 24 years old, 22 years old. You know, they're from a generation that I think is pretty, shall we say, vulnerable in many ways and less robust than generations before. These people have no idea what's coming to them, and I think they'll be quitting the job if they have to face the sort of abuse that even ex-politicians are getting.
Yep, absolutely, and we know that Labour MP Stella Creasy has herself faced awful violence and awful intimidation over her stance on abortion. So, it certainly doesn't just go left or right. It certainly goes the other way as well. Who would want to be an MP now, Nick?
Would you?
When you say no, I certainly wouldn't. It's one of the reasons I would not want to be an MP, is I'm simply not prepared to put my family through that kind of danger and abuse. I'm quite happy being a commentator, and that can be challenging enough with the type of abuse you can get as a commentator.